16, pretty good, still the same numbers. 17, JCPenney closes. We have 77,000 square feet that are vacant, and almost 62,000 square feet that are entitled to reduced rents, and we've lost one outlot building. 18, vacancy is up to 80, almost 82,000, with 67,000 reduced rent. 19, we picked up a little bit. There is a temporary rental to your university, but that doesn't generate sales tax. This is a different way of looking at it. Red is vacant. It grows, and it grows. This is the reduced rent. And it grows. So we have 43% of the square footage at reduced rent because we lost JCPenney. Here's what's happened to sales tax. Now, the first thing I will tell you is this is the full sales tax, including the state. So that's not your cumulative loss, but if you have a 1.5% sales tax, that's 7.5% there. So you can see we're doing pretty good in 2015, 1.2 million sales tax in 18, and we don't have the 19 numbers, but we have 1/3 of that revenue now for the taxing entities. Here's what's happened to sales. Almost 18 million in 2015, down to 5.8 million through 18. Cumulative loss of 12 million in sales. So, the same owner has Hayes, Kansas property, and they did precisely what we're asking to do here in Fremont to help rescue it. This was the face of the JCPenney store before. We did some exterior enhancements. Took up the old parquet floor, put that down, rehabbed some of the outlot buildings, rehabbed the food court, redid the mall sign so that it's more modern and attractive. Leavenworth, Kansas, another mall owned by the same owners. They could not get the funding to induce new tenants to come. They boarded it up, people were breaking into it, and so their manager said, the only safe thing to do is to get rid of the mall. I understand that there are some issues with a local sporting goods store, and these current owners trying to get Dunham's to come in to represent the redevelopment authority in Grand Island. Pivot Sports was in the mall area. They did an occupation tax. Dick's Sporting Goods came in, and I think if you have a better arm than mine, you can stand at Dick's Sporting Goods and throw a baseball and hit pivots. You've got to be a pretty good thrower. So I called up my friend who's the community planner in Grand Island, and I said, what happened when Dick's opened to Hibbett's? He says, you're not going to believe this. They came in and got a building permit. They doubled their square feet, increased their inventory, and they're going gangbusters. With the investment in that mall, a lot of the things that I get is, well, have they tried this one? Have they tried this one? Have they tried this one? This is a partial list of tenants that have declined to go into the facility. They are not sitting on their haunches every day. They're trying to find some way of increasing the tenancy in the mall. Another one I get is, well, if they weren't sucking out all of the cash out of this facility, they'd have plenty of funds to go after more tenants and keep it in good shape. This is what the current owner has invested out of their pocket over the last several years to get tenants in there. One of the things that the public doesn't generally understand is there's this big show in Las Vegas where all of the retailers that are looking to expand go, and all of the people with malls or vacancies go there and try and induce them to come in. And one of the things that happens is, if, yeah, I'll put you on my list maybe 3 or 4 years out, but you gotta pay me a fee now, or if I'm gonna come, I want a couple of things. I want to know who the lead tenant is, and you are going to improve the facility and lay it out just like I wanted on your nickel. And oh, by the way, I'm going to not give you any place close to the rents that the prior tenant paid. One horror story for a mall that I represent that we are successfully getting occupation tax for. A large national corporation came to them, the lead tenant, and said, by the way, unless you give us 6 months free rent, we're out of here. Boom. Deal. That major tenant. So the landlord has put in $4.8 million in those types of investments. As at least the mayor knows, when you had your flooding and people needed a place to go, and the current owner opened up the facility, the HVAC units didn't all work. And so I don't know if you build them yet or if you did that out of the kindness of your heart, but he went out there and got those units operating. So thank you. Here are the costs that current owner really needs to invest again in this mall to bring it up to speed. Needs a new roof, new HVAC units. You have to repurpose and move walls inside and new doors and new floors for new tenants. Restroom updates. And I know that that $80,000 is realistic because that's what it costs to run for, believe it or not. Mall exterior, so it looks more inviting. That comes out almost $3.4 million. Dunham's is on the hook, but it's going to take the owner $1.4 million to do the tenant improvements. So we've got 4.8. So our ask is that you impose an occupation tax of 1% on all of the mall businesses that are currently subject to sales tax. There are some things that you can't have a sales tax on, the food and that sort of thing in IVs. But the current tenant targets include Dunham's and a replacement of a JCPenney type of store. I will tell you that the third-class tenants of days of yore are now the first-class tenants. And they are saying, well, I'm not going to pay you that much, and I want Planet Fitness to come in beside me, and if you haven't noticed, what's the brand name? Forever 21 filed bankruptcy last weekend. Now, I don't think you have were Forever 21, but that's the nature of the retail beast these days. The process for going through this is we prepare a redevelopment plan, and in your packet is a proposed redevelopment plan. You have to designate the area as an enhanced employment area. This is the catchphrase under the new 2007 statute change. And what that means for a community of this size is they would have to create 10 new jobs from last January 1, and they would have to invest at least $500,000. They are not limited to 15 years like TIF bonds are, because that's a constitutional limitation. So they can go to 20 years. So the process would be, a redevelopment plan would be placed in front of you. It would then be referred by you to the Planning Commission for a hearing, come back to you as the CDA to make a referral to yourselves as just like the TIF world. After that process, you approve the plan as normal. Since this is in a blighted and substandard area, the CDA itself, rather than the City Council, designates the enhanced employment area and does so by resolution. It's a copy that I've used before in your packet. CDA and the City Council enter into an agreement whereby the council agrees to impose an occupation tax under its ordinances and provide those funds to the CDA to make bond payments. The redevelopment contract is the deal, just like it is in the TIF world. We'll do this, we'll try and build up the sales and so forth. You pass, as the council, occupation tax ordinance. You already have occupation taxes, and so the collection is the same. The CDA issues the bond, and here is the piece that not the whole world completely understands. It's not a funded bond. It's not sold to anybody. It's not a debt of the city or its citizens. It is a bond that is held by the developer. The developer then goes to the bank and says, I need $4.8 million so I can go do these things. And I hope to get repaid in part by the 1% of the increased sales. And if I don't get that, it's on me. So me, the developer, takes all of the risk, puts all the money in with the hope that this activity increases the sales tax over that period of time and repays it. Retailers have the tax imposed upon them. The city gets an administrative fee for accepting those payments and making the bond payment. The bond, we are estimating that our target is to try and get about $11 million in sales. 5 of that we believe could be in new retailers coming in, and then try and get 1% off of the taxable sales in IV. So that wouldn't be additional revenue to you. So, excuse me, yeah. Target $7 million. Have done is prepare so that you don't have to go get, you certainly can if you want, but city attorneys are certainly capable of reading documents and understanding what those are. We will provide all of the documentation for your city attorney to review and modify as is appropriate all the way through. I've done this a lot. You can sit down, go through the process. So that is the ask. I'd be glad to answer any questions.
Councilmember Jacobus.
In your prior meetings with a few of us, and it was very thorough then as you are now, so I appreciate that. Because I had met with you earlier this summer, I believe, as you did several others. And the question on here is, the city would pass an ordinance, should we agree to do this, and the city passes the ordinance, we basically act as a collector of that occupation tax, which then goes to pay the investor, or excuse me, the developer, because they're the ones that are on the hook for the bond. So once that occupation tax is collected, that's not really a risk, but that's the activity of the city at that point. But there is no liability for the city itself, and we're not the bond holder, nor are we the ones who go out to search for that bond, correct?
That's correct.
And in your experiences, Hastings, Lexington, Grand Island, et cetera, Lexington, Kansas, I guess, where you had said, correct? In Kansas, Hayes, Kansas,
Hayes did one.
and then Grand Island.
Leavenworth didn't, yeah.
The one that I had, was most aware of and looked into more after you and I had spoke was actually Grand Island. And that seems to be a profound success. Am I wrong in that? Is that still going? As it seemed like a lot of things popped up once things started to get cleaned up and expanded on?
That, yes. I actually live 100 miles from that mall, and it has the closest Harbor Freight store, and they've got a lot of my money. But what they did was actually, I know I don't look that skilled, and I'm not, but what they did at that mall is had the old strip mall.
Mm-hmm.
They ran a street through there, so they have the kind of modern mall like you have in West Omaha, so that you can drive through and walk around. So they invested, I'm going to say, north of $20 million in that rehabilitation. And they've got the new anchor of Dick's, and there are still some vacancies there, but Y is in that area. Hibbett's expanded. I don't remember if they were Marshalls or not, but anyway, they're getting a lot of attraction. Yeah, I can't give you the numbers because I just didn't pick them up on the sales.
What was the city's investment? What did the city put on the table for that? Wasn't there something that they had earmarked also for that to enhance it?
They also did TIF for a portion of it.
Okay.
So it was a dual TIF and occupation tax. Dick's did not wish to be in the occupation tax, so it was split off. But it was very low valuation, and now the valuation's going up, so they double-edged boost to help them get going.
It was a very impressive overhaul of that entire area because a lot of eateries, et cetera, also popped up. And the one question that I had gotten asked after I met with you and chatted with a few was, how does this impact us with our proximity to Omaha? Because we are roughly just over 20 minutes from the very outskirts of the west side of Omaha, from the northwest area, for any kind of shopping, et cetera. How does that impact what could happen here?
I can't get in the mind of the people, but I will give you an example. If you spend $100 here, it'll cost you $1. If you can go to Omaha and back for $1, that's, if you're going to buy $10,000 diamond ring, maybe it makes a difference, but for most of the purchases, all of these stores do have, this is our model, everyone spends $40 here on average, 40 cents. So, what I have heard from some of the folks in Omaha is there is a complaint and it goes away in about 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and people don't know. The Nebraska Crossing, I believe, has an occupation tax and some other things.
I was aware that the Gretna Mall area did. I was just wondering how that impacted it with proximate, and they're out on interstate, but they're still a quick shoot into Omaha. What's the downside of this? I mean, as far as the city and any risks, what would be our downside? Because I know that area is TIFable, but also with this, where's our downside in moving forward with this? What's the risk?
If you, I think it is mostly emotional, that, hey, you're imposing a tax on me, because I will tell you that we lost 2 more tenants this year. I have signatures from, I would say 90% of the tenants. 2 of those tenants that signed, yes, we want this, it's in your packet, are no longer there. They've left. And so if we don't do something, we're in trouble. And real frankly, to invest another $4.8 million out of their pocket at the rental rates that they have available to them, it just doesn't cash flow. So with this help and all of the monkey on the back of the owner, maybe we can increase sales. The target is increase $7 million. If you have a 1.5% sales tax, that's $105,000 to your bottom line. I will also tell you that it is not immediate. I mean, you can't snap your fingers and get a new tenant there. They're looking at 2 real strong, but the process generally is you get a convention in Las Vegas, you see what the time frame is, you get in someone's development schedule, and maybe 24 months or 36 months later. So it's not immediate, but some activity, I think, can start fairly quickly. If people know, and this, I'm not the person that negotiates with these companies. I'm just a geek lawyer. But what I hear from the people that do is communities that are actively engaged in supporting the retail malls are the ones that garner attention from the retailers and say, okay, the city's all in on this deal, we'll take a look and we'll go. You also have, even though some of you may or may not like some of the development that's going on, you have a lot of commercial and industrial activity, and that speaks well for you and is another plug for.
So I guess it comes down to, if we do nothing, we will probably get nothing. And if we take the risk, we stand to benefit and add to our bottom line. Okay. Thank you.
Yeah, the city really isn't investing any money. It's all on the owner.
Yeah, I hate to tell you this, but yeah, we even pay for your city attorney's time to do this, so, yeah.
Okay.
And generally we negotiate a fee, so finance isn't volunteering their time. There is a fee to reimburse it, so we try and, as clearly as we can, neutralize the cost for the citizens and try and provide additional retail experience and keep a huge asset from deteriorating. Any more questions?
Yeah, I have one more. Have you talked to Hy-Vee and some of the other tenants? Are they for this?
There's a stack at the back of your packet showing the signatures of a number of them. I have not personally talked to Hy-Vee, and I can't give you the answer as to whether they sat with corporate. I do know that the man that is in charge of this process has been to Hy-Vee on some other projects, and whether or not he's brought this up, I can't tell you, but we certainly would. If the tax is imposed, there obviously needs to be a lead time for this to be put in place and give everybody a chance to get their computer system ready to go.
Councilmember Yerger.
Well, a couple of the questions I wanted to ask have been asked, so I won't ask those. But I was curious. So we've spent, or the mall owner has spent about $4 million, and some left anyway. And in the process of doing that, there were reductions in the amounts that they received from other tenants because JCPenney's went away. So my question is this. If you're successful in getting another major store out there that would be an anchor store, what happens, if anything, to the reduced rates that others have got when JCPenney's left? Nothing? Or they stand as is on a renegotiated contract and new tenants pay perhaps a higher rental because of the new anchor that's existing then? How does that work?
The leases go for a period of time, and so they would be renegotiated. They're not gonna pop right back up, because a lot of them are named anchors. And so those named anchors are pretty much left the playing field, so you have to wait for the cycle to come up and get going again. The target of the numbers that I've seen are they're hoping to increase sales for the people that are there about 10%. We think, realistically, we may lose a sporting goods store, so that we're backing that out. We're trying to target a general increase. It won't be immediate. I can't stress that enough, because someone will come and say, hey, councilman, they said this and it hasn't happened by December 1st. It's not going to, and may not by the next December. So what it does is it encourages the current owner to make a really significant investment in the community and pull harder at the paddles and show, the economies is a $1.4 million hit before you get the first rent check. That's a big number. So.
How many tenants are there today that would not be subject to the 1% tax if it was imposed? You said it's only on certain taxable goods.
It's only on what is currently subject to the sales tax. Hy-Vee, for example, a large portion of that is not taxable, but a lot of the stuff that they do, I assume soaps and things like that are taxable.
What about the other tenants? Are they all taxable, do you know?
I believe so.
Okay.
I have not walked through, it's been about a month since I walked through there, and I can't get them all.
So if a 1% tax ultimately was imposed, I'm curious as to what type of a time commitment, if any, is locked on to that. Is that a 1% tax forever?
No.
Time certain till the extinguishment of the bond, or what's the time frame for the tax?
The time frame that we have calculated is 20 years. To get past that really doesn't make a lot of sense in this dynamic retail world. But so I don't know what the next disruptor is, but that's what the finance plan is based on.
Is that in any way built into any of the discussions that you have for tenancy or future tenancy in those discussions? Are they locked in for similar time constraints that would fit with this 20-year commitment? Are they locked in as well, or they could be here today and gone tomorrow?
Yeah, they could be here today and have a level term, and then they can pull the plug by filing bankruptcy or leaving the premises and continuing to pay the rent until the end of the term. Most of these have term certain and renewal options.
Thank you.
All good questions.
Any other questions? Councilmember Ellis.
Jody, this is a question for you. Can you just give me an overview on the current occupational tax? What's the amount, and how much do we collect? I'm sorry, I'm springing that on you. I'm just curious on what we charge the rest of the city.
I'm guessing you're referring to the food and beverage tax?
Yeah.
Okay, so that's at 1.25%, and we are capped at 700,000. We can't earn more than that.
We can charge up to what, 1.5%, but we backed it off?
No, actually, I believe it's up to 2%, but
2%,
as
okay.
long as you're keeping it underneath that level.
That's why we had to back it off to that 1.25, because
Right.
we were bumping up against that 700,000.
And that's 700,000 a year?
Yes.
And it's a food and tax, so that would, that's applied to some of the stores in the mall already, right?
Yes.
Okay. Just curious. Thank you.
Councilmember Jensen.
Am I to understand that there would not be any new tax on these businesses in the mall until after there is a plan in place? And does that include having a retailer coming in?
What the plan is that there'd be a lead time for the imposition of the tax, So, for example, in one, we've asked that it be after the holiday season, so like January 1st or something like that, so that that doesn't impact the Christmas sales. And then the tax starts, they would start negotiating and hopefully inking deals to get people in, start the rehabilitation process. For the Dunhams, they gotta do some stuff to the roof and the HVAC, and so there's a lot of money going on. So, the imposition of the tax would likely occur before new people are.
The tax would occur first. Does it start, would start,
Yeah,
there'd be
would
some
start,
lag
yeah.
time. All right,
Some
thank
of
you.
this goes at the same time.
Mhm.
Real frankly, if you started today, you couldn't get them in by the end of the year. There's too much work to do.
Councilmember, your
So that question leads me to a follow-up question that was related to the question I asked earlier. So if the tax starts ahead of time and you're collecting funds, whatever, there's no specific time constraints when a new tenant necessarily is placed in the mall. The tax could go on for how long before there's any requirement that the tax stops if you don't get a new tenant? I mean, they're tied together, obviously, but nevertheless, I guess my thought would be, you don't want to be collecting tax forever and ever and not putting new tenants in the mix if that was your goal. So are those contractually tied to that if that doesn't happen, the tax stops or anything like that, or what?
Excellent question. Generally, what the tax is for is to induce the investment from the outside. And can they guarantee that the target won't bolt? No. What they can guarantee is I'm going to invest these dollars to try and get people in there, because right now they're bleeding. And they want to stop the bleeding and they want to start the healing. So it's impossible to put into the contract that says you will get X number of square feet filled by X date, because it doesn't unfortunately work that way. What doesn't happen is you don't start paying money that you're collecting to the developer until the developer proves to you that, okay, I invested $600,000 in a new roof and $400 for the HVAC. So can you start sending me some of the receipts to pay on the bond? The way I would envision it is like draw a note, if you will, saying, all right, I've invested $1 million so far, so I want my interest to start running on the bond and getting some help from that. Now I've got a big anchor in there and I've invested $1.4 million, so the bond goes up, but don't do those things, you don't get the money. And so if it goes on and on, yeah, the current tenants have that burden of that occupation tax and that collection. But it is self-defeating if nothing else happens. So they've got to bring it in.
Well, bringing in tenants is one thing. Doing mall restoration work to enhance the ability to get tenant works, I'm assuming that can and would start earlier, although still you have to be cautious with that too, because new tenants will require certain things and it may not be what you just did, so you have to proceed with caution in the approach to the renovations. But certainly renovation in advance of a tenant doing a look at what you've got to offer makes some sense as well, and that's what that advance collection of funds would be used for. Is that right?
That's very accurate. To get the new big lead in there, we're going to have to move some other people around, and so start that process on an interior basis. But hopefully that's backed by, we've got the deal inked. So we have some MOUs outstanding. We just need to figure out a way to pull it off.
City Administrator Newton.
I think you made an application for an LB 840. Do you remember how much it was for, Lottie?
I did not. That
400,000?
preceded my
Yeah.
representation. I think they were actually 400,000.
400,000, and I think council turned it down. Is that correct? And we talked at the time, I think we talked about TIF, but I don't believe there were any TIF eligible expenses.
There were, the challenge was, the challenge was, unless you did a total scrape and
Right.
rebuild,
Right.
there wasn't enough expenses to make the TIF viable. And we looked at TIF first and spent quite a bit of time, but there's just not a lot, just not enough to make TIF work.
Yeah, the values on malls are going down and not up in terms of assessed valuation, so it'd have to be something magic. I go to Denver a fair amount to see my grandkids, and I take the loop around, and you can see vacant malls to the left. It's just amazing. Just acres and acres and acres of vacant malls.
So this is about one of the last things that we can do to try to help our mall. Because we've explored pretty much everything else. So as you draw down, so as you take the note out for each improvement, each note's then tied to a 20-year amortization schedule?
Starting on day one, the tax runs for 20 years, and then you populate, you advance, and hopefully get that paid off by the time the occupation tax terminates. And if not, the holder of the bond is the
Like-
developer, and he doesn't get his money back.
So you collateralize the note through a bank then?
What they do is they go borrow money from
Mhm.
a bank to do the investment, then they come and certify to the finance director, I've invested $1.4 million here, paid bills, please endorse that on the note. Used that very successfully, and well, I have
Correct.
one community that really got outside bond counsel that did some really weird things because he'd never done one of these. That's the cleanest way, so you can prove to your constituents, this is how much they spent, and here's the file on it, so.
Gotcha. What happens if you generate more sales tax and the bonds are actually paid off sooner than the 20 years? What happens then?
Bond pays off sooner, and you can terminate the occupation.
We are allowed to terminate the occupation tax? Okay, thank you.
Any other questions?
Thank you so much for.
Thank you.
Letting me go first, I really appreciate that.
You just have a drive, a longer drive.
Moving on to item number 4, actually item number 3 now. Receive information and discuss property assessed clean energy PACE district.
So we're handing out Chris's PowerPoint, so you'll have a hard copy of the entire packet, but that's why Chris has got his PowerPoint in there too, so you want to just wait a minute until they receive it.
So we'll take a motion to receive what Tyler's handing out. Councilman Yerger?
The packet, so I don't think we really need to receive it because it's the packet that went out to everyone.
Yeah, but you need to further
For the-
receive his PowerPoint though.
It's PowerPoint, okay. It's included in
We
the
did the
packet.
other one.
I make a motion to receive the packet material.
Councilman Jensen.
I'll second.
Ready?
McLean? Ellis? Coons? Yerger? Jensen? Jacobus? Legband? Motion carries 7-0. Yeah. This is a copy of just the packet.
Yeah.
Okay.
Oh, no.
That one that I was handing out was the entire agenda packet, so it includes that information.
Yeah, I printed mine at home at the office. Are we set? All right.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, my name is Chris Peterson, and I'm with Pace Sage Capital. I live and work in Lincoln, and thank you for the opportunity to be here with you tonight. I am an advocate for PACE financing and a consultant that appears before councils like yourself to share background about what PACE is, how it works, and what you would do to implement a PACE financing program here for the city of Fremont. And I'll dive right in. Please feel free to interrupt me at any time with questions. PACE is private capital. It's long-term, non-recourse. It finances the energy efficiency components of a commercial real estate project, also water conservation, as well as renewable energy systems if someone wanted to use it to finance solar panels or perhaps geothermal. PACE loans are secured by an assessment contract on the property, and they're repaid somewhat similar to property tax in that they're an assessment on the property. In many states that have PACE, the PACE assessments are paid alongside a property tax bill, and the payments therefore go to the county and then to the city and then to the lender. You'll be glad to know that in Nebraska, we're one of a few states that allow direct collection, and so you don't have to serve as a pass-through for the PACE payments. There are no public funds at risk. As you've already heard me say, this is private capital, and so there's no public funds involved in commercial PACE, and there's no city or taxpayer liability. And that's very clear in the state law that allows for PACE, and as well as the assessment contract. And so you can rest assured that is not an issue when it comes to PACE financing. PACE has been approved in 36 states and the District of Columbia. It also, at this point, of those states, 20 of them have active commercial PACE programs. Another 6 or so have programs in development. Nebraska's PACE law was passed in 2017, or 2016 rather, and Omaha became the first city to adopt an ordinance and implement a program in 2017. In 2018, the first PACE loan was funded in Omaha, and since then, Lincoln has adopted an ordinance and has had projects approved. And in August, La Vista adopted a PACE ordinance and implemented the PACE program. The largest project to date in Nebraska has been a $24.9 million project in the city of Omaha. It was actually 3 loans on 3 separate parcels of property. One was the Marriott Capital District in downtown Omaha, and then adjacent to it, the retail building, and then the third was the apartment complex. But altogether, it was a $24.9 million transaction, and it was the largest PACE transaction in the country in 2018. The smallest project to date in Nebraska has been a $900,000 car wash. The car wash itself was new construction. It's probably being built right now in West Omaha. Probably, I think, about $4 million total cost. The $900,000 PACE loan paid for a water reclamation system. Omaha has high fees to deal with their sewer rebuild when it comes to wastewater, and the ability of the car wash to reclaim the water and reuse it became a real driver in their desire to install this system. And so once they looked at PACE and how PACE could work for them, it really made a lot of sense for them to use PACE to finance that component of the project. So altogether, there's been 12 PACE loans approved in Nebraska, 10 in Omaha and 2 in Lincoln, approximately $45 million total for those 12 projects. 8 of them have been hotels. The others have been apartments an indoor sports facility, which is in Lincoln. It's a basketball and volleyball court facility being built on West O Street. The car wash that I mentioned and the retail that I mentioned as part of the Capital District in downtown Omaha. So what can qualify for PACE financing? Really anything that touches energy efficiency or water conservation. And so it's a long list. The obvious things are HVAC and lighting and windows, but insulation, roof, caulking. If you replace an elevator and the new elevator is more energy efficient, then the elevator can qualify. And so, again, anything that improves energy efficiency can qualify to be financed with a PACE loan. So, how might you use PACE? Well, on redevelopments, renovations, retrofits, rehabs, conversions of an existing building, and typo on this slide. Owner-occupied building projects, new construction, and nonprofits. And so a YMCA could use it for a new construction of a new YMCA or a remodel rehab of an existing YMCA. And churches as well. So here's a real simple view of how PACE, a PACE loan might fit in the capital stack. Without PACE, you might have a $700,000, $70,000 bank loan and $30,000, $300,000, whatever the numbers are of owner's equity. With PACE, PACE is often viewed as equity in the capital stack, and so you could replace the owner's equity. It could also relieve their need to get mezzanine financing. And so instead of getting expensive financing from your rich uncle who wants to make 12 or 15% interest, PACE might make a lot of sense. Today, we're in a very odd circumstance with the inverted yield curve. PACE loans are in the neighborhood of 5.25% to 6.25%. It's a little higher than your conventional bank loan. Recently, term sheets that I've seen on PACE loans have been about 5.8%. But that's generally the range where you're going to see a PACE interest rate come in at. But again, you have to think about the selling points. It's fixed rate, it's long-term, it's non-recourse, and so there's some advantages over other types of financing. And the example earlier of using PACE financing versus mezzanine financing. And so again, it's a cheaper, lower interest rate than what you might find if you have to look at mezzanine financing for your project. In Nebraska, PACE financing is available up through project completion. And so you can't use PACE financing for a refinance. In a lot of states, you can use it for a refinance after a project is completed. But here in Nebraska, we're only authorized to use it up through the time when you receive a final certificate of occupancy on the project for which you're trying to get the financing. So we can fund up to 100% of those eligible items. And so if your HVAC unit units are, say, $300,000 component of your project, we can finance all of that $300,000 as long as they're improving energy efficiency over what was there before. And so on a renovation of an existing building that might need that much sort of HVAC upgrades, you're looking at the current utility usage, the current, let's say, if those existing HVAC units were 20 or 25 years old, by replacing them, you can finance 100% of the cost of that replacement. On a new construction building, you could only finance the HVAC units if they exceed current city code. And so if the builder or developer, the property owner, decided that they were going to use HVAC units that met the code but no greater than code, they wouldn't be eligible to be financed. And so again, we're encouraging the use of energy efficient fans. PACE loans are typically $500,000 up to $20 million. The largest PACE loan in the country was done a couple of years ago in California, where seismic upgrades are eligible to be for PACE financing, and they rehabbed a hospital. The cost was $40 million, and so that is the largest PACE loan to date. Typically, we would expect the low end would be around $500,000. There may be some exceptions to that, but we would think that would probably be the low end for a commercial PACE loan. Once the council adopts PACE, the PACE projects don't come back to the council for approval. It's an administrative review and approval process handled by city staff typically, and so because it doesn't have to come back to you for a resolution or for a separate ordinance, it shortens the amount of time for approval. For every PACE loan, a senior lender or a bank that's involved on the property has to provide written consent. And so one of the early questions that you raise with a property owner or a developer that has an interest in PACE is, how's your lender going to feel about having a PACE loan in the capital stack? And it becomes an important question, and oftentimes a point of education for the senior lender or for the bank, because PACE loans are a little bit different than other loans in that because if you remember back to the beginning of my presentation, they have a special status. They're similar to property tax in some ways. If there is ever a default, if somebody misses a payment, then there's a lien filed on the property for that missed payment, but only for the amount of that missed payment, and that has priority status equal to tax for that missed payment. And so the entire PACE loan doesn't accelerate and jump ahead of a bank loan. It's just the amount of a missed payment. So usually when a bank is just becoming familiar with PACE, and they understand that in those kinds of circumstances, their position is only impacted by that one missed payment or a couple of missed payments, they become more comfortable with consenting to PACE being in the capital stack. A number of Nebraska banks now that we've done 12 projects in the state have consented to PACE, and I probably about once a month or once every other month, I am making a presentation to a bank, answering their questions and helping them feel comfortable about what PACE is and how it works, similar to tonight's presentation. One of the key things that gets brought to the city as part of an application for approval for PACE is an energy report or an energy engineering analysis that specifies what are the items that are qualified measures to be financed, and what's the construction costs of those items, what's the energy savings that you're deriving from those items over their useful average life, and therefore what is that cost savings that you're achieving from installing and using those items, and ultimately the cost savings that you've determined over the useful average life of all the items that are eligible to be financed. That total amount has to be equal to or greater than the base capital costs of the items you want to finance. And about half the states have this similar requirement. It's called a savings to investment ratio. And but not every state does. Some states offer more flexibility and acknowledge that if a project, an energy efficiency project, clearly is going to reduce utility bills, it might not actually pay for itself, even though it makes sense for the builder or the property owner to use that item. It might not actually pay for itself over the duration of the life of that item. And so in some states, they allow you to still go ahead and use PACE without meeting an SIR standard. And because utility prices can fluctuate, and in Nebraska, you may all know that we'll have a big change in energy codes effective next July 1st. The legislature did provide some flexibility on this point with the passage of LB 23 this past session to amend the PACE Act and to allow that an applicant can ask for a waiver of this SIR standard. And so let's say that their utility savings was going to equal 91% or 96% or 89% of their total capital costs. They could ask that the PACE administrator waive that SIR standard and still allow them to be eligible to use PACE financing. And you may run into some of those circumstances once that energy code moves from that 2009, the state energy code from that 2009 standard. I think it's going to 2018 standard next July 1st. So if you want to adopt a PACE ordinance and set up a PACE program, what do you have to do? So you pass the ordinance, and the ordinance as a piece of that designates a PACE administrator. Oftentimes it might be the city administrator, it might be the planning director, somebody on city staff typically. There'll be a guidebook published that'll lay out the rules for any potential applicants to know what they have to follow, and a fee schedule and an application. Then once the program is in place, then the city would accept PACE applications, including a fee. The typical application fee that the other Nebraska cities have adopted is $1,000. Although interesting, I was talking to a program administrator in Arkansas last week, and their fee is $25. The PACE administrator, so again, it might be your city administrator, your planning director, would review the application and make sure that everything is submitted, complies with the act, everything required has been submitted. And again, it will include that energy report that you saw. It'll include background about the project, and then the administrator will approve or deny the application. Once the application is approved, then the administrator issues a letter of approval or a letter of qualification. And then at that point, then the PACE lender, again, private capital provider, and the borrower will work on their assessment contract. And once they've negotiated the terms of that assessment contract, they'll bring it to the city, because all three parties, the city is the PACE administrator, the borrower and the lender, all sign on that assessment contract. And so your city attorney will get a chance to review and offer comment and ask for changes. At this point, fortunately, with Omaha and Lincoln having gone through this, we have hopefully pretty good Nebraska documents. So it won't be a huge burden on a city attorney or city staff. At the time the loan closes, the city receives an administrative fee. That fee that the other cities in Nebraska have adopted has been set at 1% of the amount of the PACE loan. So let's say the PACE loan is $500,000, so it'd be a $5,000 fee at the time of closing on the loan. The other cities have all adopted a view that if you have a TIF that has also come before the city, and therefore the city's familiar with your project, they've seen it before, and so it's not something brand new that they've had to review, that they would give you and you've paid a fee already on your TIF application, they would give you a 50% discount on your PACE fee, administrative fee. And then a third party confirms that the measures that are supposed to have been installed were actually installed. Ongoing in every year for the next 20 years or whatever that length is of the PACE loan, the city would receive an annual fee for administering the program. Again, every city in Nebraska so far has gone with a $500 a year fee. And then what are your responsibilities at that point going forward? Well, if there is a default, then the city, as the PACE administrator, would file the lien on the property. And so the lender would notify you they have a very short window to do so. I think it's 3 days, 3 business days of default, to notify the city of that. and then you have a period to file that lien. And then, there's an annual report due to the legislature about what activity you've done in this arena. And so if you've approved a PACE loan or what have you, you would send a letter or short report to the legislature. And those really are your obligations going forward. So why would you do this? Well, I'm here before you tonight because I've had two developers who are planning to have projects here in Fremont that have an interest in using PACE financing. I've had similar presentations in recent months in Columbus and Beatrice. Columbus plans to have a PACE ordinance up for first reading this month, as does Beatrice. I have on my calendar future presentations like this at Plattsmouth and North Platte. We have a project in Hastings and have had some conversation with them. I know of a project in Grand Island, and so I expect they'll be looking seriously at adopting a PACE ordinance and PACE program. And I also have a potential project that I'm aware of in Waverly. And so there's a lot of interest growing in using this new tool. And so I'm here tonight because there are developers, and one of whom is here tonight, who has an interest in this. Again, I want to emphasize there's no public funds at risk. It's private capital. Your obligation, your costs are your staff and city attorney's time at the outset to figure out what this is and come back and recommend to you whether or not to go forward and how to do that. The good news is Omaha, Lincoln, La Vista have done it. And so I've got a template ordinance that reflects what that language would look like based on those ordinances and the recently passed amendment to the PACE Act. At this point, there's a template application, a template program guide. So your costs up front in terms of staff time and the city attorney's time would be less so than cities that have gone before you. Of course, they'll still want to do their due diligence, but there's a pathway. So it gives you as a city another economic development tool in your toolbox to be able to say that you've got for existing buildings owners to use, or to help recruit someone new to the city to make an investment. And it was interesting, I was talking with another Nebraska city and they asked some questions, so I threw it on the slide here. Iowa and Kansas do not have PACE. And so if you think about the competitive world of economic development, it's a tool that not every state has, including two neighboring states that quite often our state competes for economic development projects for. So with that, happy to answer questions and encourage you to seriously consider and hopefully to adopt a PACE ordinance and implement a PACE program.
Councilmember Jacobus.
You had mentioned that if there's a mispayment, whatever, that the city would be notified because initially that's where your oversight is in the approval. Why do we file the lien and not the note holder itself as the bank, whichever bank has considered it? Why are we the ones filing it?
As the PACE administrator, the city would be responsible for that, and that is standard across PACE programs across the country, and so that would be one of the small number of responsibilities that the city would have.
So you'd mentioned that these are for commercial projects. Is this something that the city itself could have any eligibility for as far as any new construction or existing structures of our own to do something similar?
The answer is yes, but it is complicated and a high bar for you to be able to use it, unfortunately. When the law was originally passed in Nebraska in 2016, there were some severe restrictions placed on political subdivisions' ability to use it. It wasn't something that I was supportive of, but there was somebody who was very leery of what this was and what it might be. And so during negotiations on the bill, they required that a political subdivision would have to go to a vote of the people to allow its use. And so the cost benefit of doing that really doesn't make sense.
Starts to negate itself. This looks like an interesting tool to use, so thank you for your presentation.
truly it opens the door, you know, even for the mall, as I look through a roof at 621, HVAC at 400, restroom update with more efficient stools and toilets and all that stuff. I look at the 505 downtown, and the possibilities are endless with new HVAC, new roof, new insulation. We can't do much with the windows, but I mean, there's just going to be a lot of things that in efficiency, it opens the door. And again, it's not really a handout. But it is a 20-year loan at a fixed rate, at a percentage that is affordable for some of these projects that maybe opens the door for, or gives us an advantage for some of these projects that maybe couldn't be done any other way. So again, it's kind of exciting that it's available. My only question, I mean, if we set it up for the entire city. I don't know is it set up for one area, or is it, you kind of do have an ordinance for this, so do you set it up for a region or a subdivision or for the entire city?
Yeah, it's certainly possible that you could say, we're only going to allow this in the downtown area. Nobody else, no other city in Nebraska has chosen to do that. I don't think any other city in the country has chosen to do that.
I don't know why you would, but I kind of read that as I
Yeah.
read through the information. It kind of made it appear that that's how
Yeah.
you set up districts, but
You certainly
I think
could.
we'd set the whole city up.
Right, and so the way we've set the state law up and the ordinances to follow is it's the city proper, but also your ETJ, your extraterritorial zoning. So.
Perfect. Councilman Yerger.
One of the questions that I had as you were going through the material was the impact that's created by whatever it is you're using the funds for. I assume that has a positive effect on property value assessments in the end.
Yes.
So they go hand in glove, even though you're making separate payments to the county to handle the PACE loan or whatever. The enhanced property value ends up in the assessments immediately upon completion as they go through that process. So there's an elevation in property tax values to the city secondarily in that regard, correct?
Right, absolutely.
Okay. One of the other things that you said, I think, was that once the council deals with this, this becomes a matter for the administration to handle on a matter of the fact basis, which includes, I think you said, the waiver that was out there potentially based on the new state law. That would become a duty of the administration not to come before council again. So it sounded like once passed, there may be nothing coming back to council on these again. Is that correct?
That is correct. On the waiver specifically, there may be a way to draw it up to bring that to council, or let's say that the PACE administrator denied the waiver. There is an appeal process, and that appeal process would reflect whatever typical appeal process you might have in place already.
That's kind of why I was asking my question. I'm not saying for or against whether or not you want administration to handle it or council. I'm not taking an issue on that. My real question really gets to the heart of how much city code we might need to rewrite to facilitate that, because this is not a duty today of the planning director, for example.
Yeah.
And it may be something that would be referred to the Board of Adjustment for adjudication if there was appeal. However, it's not recognized in code that this is one of those things that they would adjudicate. So we might have some cleanup to do besides putting in something in the ordinance that just facilitates this. There may be other sections that we need to look at to make this work. Would that not? I know you don't know our code, but it would seem logical.
Right. Yeah, and I don't mean to suggest the city attorney has no work to do and you're just going to adopt the model. But the model reflects what the other cities have done, and the PACE lenders say that they can lend under that language. And so certainly wanted to conform to how Fremont's city code looks, feels, but substantive changes, we'd really want to talk about those and make sure it didn't upset the apple cart.
Yeah. The last thing I wanted to question you about, and you won't know the answer to this either, but it's one that I would want to think about, or investigate relative to your statement that this only applies to the efficiencies that are created above and beyond the code you have today. So, for example, if we have a standard for heating or air conditioning and it's laid out in code, and you said, yeah, and if somebody brings you something that's not in excess of that, doesn't qualify. My question's kind of the other way around. How long has it been since we looked at our code to see how energy efficient the code items are, if we're going to measure new efficiencies in order to qualify? Because I don't know what those are.
Right.
And how old they are.
So I would answer your question in a couple different ways. I don't know what the age of Fremont's code is, but what I would say first of all is, again, I want to be clear that on new construction, you have to exceed code.
Right.
On a renovation on the 505, just taking things to code is enough to qualify. The reality is a lot of developers, a lot of project owners, property owners are looking at products that are above code. And so whether it be windows, insulation, what have you. And so but at the end of the day, ACE was originally developed 10 years ago or so to encourage energy efficiency. And I think the more PACE loans that we see, the more we see PACE used, the more we'll see that happen as people become more aware of it. Today, what happens oftentimes is I meet a developer and they're into their project and they say, wow, I'd like to use that. And they've already made a lot of decisions, but it makes sense in their capital stack. And so we work with them and get that done. But I think as more and more people become aware of it, we'll see it's really incenting energy efficiency.
Yeah, it sounds intriguing. There's no question about that. The question is, how much preliminary work do we have to do outside of, we might have a lot of standardization used in other cities for the forms and applications and those kind of things, but our own code prep might be something that would slow us down a little. I'm not sure. Thanks.
Councilmember Jacobus.
Just a question, what's the actual risk to the city to follow through and do this? Where's our risk? Other than time, whether it goes to city administration and Ms. Lottie or Greater Fremont, whoever we designate as administration, other than that time, what's our actual risk in doing this and following this through? Or versus not?
There's none. I get asked this by city administrators at council meetings. There's no risk to the city.
Am I correct in assuming that there's a bigger risk in not doing it? Because to me, this seems kind of a common sense approach and helps increase the loanability to a developer.
Yeah. I would tell you, so 505 is certainly, Ryan has an interest in using this on that project. But amazingly enough, when literally I think the same week that Ryan and I connected, which was maybe a month or 2 months ago, literally at the same time I had another developer contact me who wants to do a project in Fremont. And that developer told me that I could say that they're so interested in PACE that it could be a tipping point for them on whether or not they would do their project.
Yeah, it certainly is an incentive that's available for us to at least go down the path and determine what it's at. Again, the tools we have are limited for economic development, and whatever we can add to that, this is just one more tool for the bag, and we can use all the advantages we can get. So certainly something that we thought was important for everybody to take a look at. So, any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
At this time, I would take a motion to adjourn. Councilmember Legman,
I make a motion to adjourn.
Councilmember Jacobus,
Can it,
cast your votes.
better vote yes.
Motion carries